You're listening to a podcast from the South China Morning Post.
Hello and welcome to the US-China Trade War Update with me, Finbarr Bermingham, on the Political Economy Desk at the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. It's Thanksgiving week. Outgoing US President Donald Trump has been pardoning turkeys and reportedly plotting a few legislative grenades to chuck China's way ahead of his presidential exit, less than 2 months away now. But over this side of the world, it's been more about statements made by an unusually vocal Xi Jinping. Just days after signing the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, he voiced his support for China joining another trade deal, the artist formerly known as the TPP. One in the eye for US multilateralists who still fume over Trump's decision to pull out of what one of its architects told me this week is still the highest grade agreement out there. Will he? Won't he? China currently would not meet requirements around state-owned enterprises, data and other areas. But in this crazy age, stranger things have happened. Or have they? Let's get on with the show, or as Chancellor Merkel might say, Lass gehen. A week after China and 14 other Asian nations signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP that is, Xi Jinping surprised us at the APEC summit last Friday when he said China is actively considering joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Bit of a mouthful. We'll just call it CPTPP from now on. A rival trade deal viewed as being higher quality and more modern than RCEP, which mostly dealt with tariff reduction. Zhou, John Carter, we were caught off guard a little bit by this when there have been various utterances from the Chinese government that China would try and join this. But Zhou, it was a little bit of a surprise to hear it come from Xi Jinping, certainly the most senior source this has come from yet. What do we read into this?
Exactly, Finbarr. The idea of China joining the CPTPP was firstly raised by some Chinese scholars. And as you know, if some Chinese scholars say, yes, we should join this club, there are also some people saying, no, it's never possible. This is an anti-China club. How can China be possibly joining this anti-China club? And then gradually, Premier Li Keqiang saying, China is open to join this club. And now this was Xi Jinping, which showed that Beijing has made up its mind. And also there is a consensus within Beijing that China should apply to join CPTPP. Now they're kicking the ball into the court of the members. China is knocking at the door. Whether they are open to allow China in or not, the pressure is on the other side. So China has made it clear, saying, yes, we support free trade, we support multilateralism. Yes, we may have many problems they don't like, the state-owned enterprises, freedom of information, labor and environment standards, but we are ready to talk with you. Okay, now I think the pressure is on the other side, and particularly for the United States now it's quite awkward, right? Are they going to rush to join in? If they go back, and it will look like because China is trying to join, so the United States have no other choice but to go back to the club. Yeah. But if the U.S. stay on the sideline, then China will say, okay, then you are completely sidelined. Yeah, this is our club.
It has created a tough one for Joe Biden before he comes into office. I spoke to a number of officials from CPTPP nations this week. One of them called it a bit of pot stirring. The US was one of the original members of the previous guise of the CPTPP, the TPP, but exited the deal in Donald Trump's first week in office. John, the week in which Xi Jinping has congratulated President-elect Biden on his electoral victory by threatening to further move into the US vacuum in the region, is China laying down a gauntlet for him in the next breath?
You can look at it that way, but I think that what China wants, and Zhou can back me up on this, is it would like an end or at least a reduction in the trade war, in the tech war, in the U.S. efforts to contain China. Now, the attitude in Washington is very much in favor of confronting China, but the question is by how much and using what methods. Obviously, Trump was very antagonistic. Let's use tariffs. Let's ban U.S. companies from doing business with Chinese companies. Biden, at least from what we hear so far and from his appointments to his cabinet, suggests he's going to try multilateral pressure to convince China to obey multilateral rules more than they're doing now. Whether that'll be a success or not remains to be seen. But I don't know that China is looking to confront Biden yet, and they may be hopeful that they can strike a more balanced approach to the relationship that allowed China to continue to develop its economy and go forward in a relatively more peaceful atmosphere. Again, it remains to be seen.
There's a school of thought, both from U.S. officials, also from people around Asia Pacific and from TPP countries, that this is the same old rhetoric where China likes the trimmings of multilateralism without actually having to make the sacrifices. They point to Xi Jinping's speech at Davos in 2017 when, very much in stark contrast to Trump, who of course was banging the drum for protectionism and tariffs, Xi stood up and said, we will be the beacon of multilateralism. There's an argument to be made, did that happen? Did China follow through with that, John?
It depends on your point of view, and by that I mean in terms of Western developed countries, China's economy is still not as open, not near as open as they would like. But in terms of developing countries, China has been relatively more successful both in trade and in diplomacy. I think that the point that developing countries were relatively underrepresented in global economic management, and China has championed them. I think they've been relatively successful in that compared to what was there, say, 5 years ago. Having said that, there are problems with their development. The Belt and Road Initiative has run into questions. China is taking the world stage and finding out that there are both good points and bad points of being a leader, that you become a target as well as seen as a help. But in terms of developed countries, I think China is realizing that it faces a big challenge going forward. And that is one of the main reasons for this dual circulation economic strategy, the turn inward, is figuring that it will be more difficult for China to do business externally in coming years.
Zhou, you mentioned that the challenges China might have in entering the TPP, CPTPP, standards around state-owned enterprises, transparency, data rules, digital trade. These could all complicate China's bid, not to mention the fact that it's also fallen out with some of the members, Australia and Canada, to name but two. Do you see this as a deal that China would join on the terms that are set out? Or is this something that China would try and do on its own terms and say, look, you either want us part of it or you don't? I mean, can China, in technical terms, is there appetite to reform the state-owned enterprises in China to an extent that they wouldn't be favoured over, say, Japanese or, say, South Korean companies or Australian companies?
Well, I think for China, Finbarr, the fact that China can start negotiating the entry into TPP is already a win for the Chinese government. So I don't think China is looking forward to say, let's sign this deal in next year or next 2 years. Remember, China spent basically more than 20 years negotiating to this WTO, GATT at the very beginning. So China apparently is saying this is a direction that I would like to go, but during the process, how far or how fast I will go depends on the process of domestic economic development and also what kind of negotiation process are going on with TPP members. So for the state-owned enterprises, for now it looks like the differences are huge. But China is trying very hard to sell the viewpoint that there's a competitive neutrality. State-owned enterprises, they are owned by the state, but they can compete like a normal property. Of course, it's facing an uphill battle to convince its trade partners that's the case. But at least China is trying to sell this. And there are some room for discussion. For instance, if Beijing offers to Brussels or offers to Japan, say, what kind of conditions would you like to see, for us to to do about the state-owned enterprises. And then there's an ABC to-do list. And maybe China will do 2 of them, and so that the problem can be solved.
Yeah.
That's my imagination, of course.
You should become a negotiator, Zhou.
Can I say that a good early indicator of China's willingness to compromise will be the investment treaty negotiations with Europe, which are due to end at the end of the year. If China and Europe, after almost 8 years of negotiations, do agree an investment treaty, it would be because China has satisfied Europeans' demand for better access to the Chinese market and fewer perks for state-owned enterprises. And that would be a major accomplishment.
One more point I would like to make is for all these kind of external agreements, for the trade deals, WTO agreements, we should remember that on paper it's one thing, but in terms of the implementation, if China is confident that it can have total control of the implementation process, that would be relatively easier for China to say something. For instance, for the opening the banking sector to foreign banks. In the WTO entry, everyone was saying, by that time, Chinese banking system was technically bankrupted. If HSBC or Citigroup came in, and no Chinese bank is, even able to be close to be competitive. But 20 years later, if you look at that, the market share of the foreign banks is still less than 2%. Basically, they're neglectable. And the trick, I think, is in the implementation process. China's unique political economy structure, China's regulatory environment, let alone all these kind of small things. For every foreign bank, you can open only 1 branch a year, but for a city commercial bank, you can basically open 10 branches a year. So these kind of small rules or the details in the implementation process also can ensure that China really do not lose control of the direction, even in terms of state-owned enterprises. It is happy to privatize some state-owned enterprises and say, for instance, Tianjin, we reported that the whole city is in big problem and the Tianjin government is in desperate need of selling off its state-owned enterprises, privatize them. So China can absolutely use these as examples to say, we are making concessions. Look, in Tianjin, we have selling equity stakes in more than 100 of the state-owned enterprises. These kind of concessions.
Yeah. A couple of things I wanted to point out from the reporting I was doing this week about this issue. Wei Jianguo, who's the former vice minister at the Commerce Ministry for Trade, he covered foreign trade. His view was that the reason China is moving now is because it's now or never. If the US joins under Biden, then the door's closed to China, the theory goes. So China has been almost like set into a sense of urgency by raising its hand and saying, okay, we're interested in joining because of the arrival of Joe Biden on the scene, who is seen as a more multilateral leader. Second point I wanted to say is that speaking to US negotiators, I spoke to one guy who was the lead lawyer in the US-China bilateral investment negotiations way back in 2015, I'm going to guess. And he said that as they were negotiating the bilateral investment treaty, Chinese negotiators had the Chinese and English language versions of the TPP chapters in front of them because they were cross-referencing what the US was negotiating with China with what the US had negotiated with the rest of Asia. And the implication from this negotiator was that perhaps A, maybe China had one eye on a future in TPP, and B, China was also quite worried about the US's presence in TPP, that it was a sort of source of friction. Zhou, has that been something down the years that was the case? Before they pulled out in 2016, was the US presence in TPP a worry to policymakers in Beijing?
Definitely, Finbarr. This TPP thing, as I said in my column, this is possibly one of the biggest factors driving the RCEP. Because China is seeing that the US is going to take a leadership in this Asia-Pacific trade bloc, and China is basically excluded. And this is something that really worried about Beijing. And also looking at these terms, clauses within the TPP agreement, for those terms about about environment, about human rights, about labor, about the state-owned enterprises, China sees this as kind of US-led conspiracy targeting at China. So when Donald Trump said, the United States pulled out of the TPP. I think, many Chinese officials in Beijing were like, open lots of champagne to celebrate it. This is really a strategic gift.
The expensive baijiu was hit that night, I'm sure.
Yes.
John, it's Thanksgiving. Are you thankful for being here doing the podcast with us on this lovely Thursday?
I have a job and I do not have COVID-19, so yes, I'm very thankful. But
excellent.
Could I interject and keep this conversation in context? I mean, the conventional wisdom is that Biden has so many domestic problems he has to work on that the whole trade issue will take a back seat, at least initially. Obviously, COVID is running rampant in the United States, daily records for infections and deaths almost every day, and we're heading into the holiday season and cold weather. And then once you get past the virus, if you get past the virus, then you have the economy to deal with in a probably divided Congress. So Biden has a lot of work ahead of him.
Yeah.
Having said that, his appointments to his cabinet are multilateralist. They believe in the organizations. They believe in the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations. And I think we'll see a very different approach to international relations from the Biden administration. How big a priority re-entering the CPTPP will be for Biden remains to be seen. I don't think it's in his top 10 right now.
No, I don't think so either. Even the multilateral front of the Democratic Party don't think that it's going to be anything immediate. But look, it's going to be something that people are going to be discussing, and we're going to be keeping an eye out for that. Before we finish up on this, what are we looking out for in the days and in the week ahead?
Okay, looking forward, I think Xi Jinping is going to make another big speech on regional trade at this China-ASEAN summit. This will be the fourth kind of keynote trade-focused speech in the last 5 weeks, and you can see how much priority the Chinese leader is putting on the trade issues. The first one is in the Shanghai Import Expo. Then he delivered two speeches about regional trade agreements and his view about the future of the world trade at APEC. And tomorrow he's going to make another speech. Is that tomorrow or weekend? He's going to make another speech to the ASEAN leaders to tell them that stay with us, instead of stay within America. That's the key message she is going to telling the Southeast Asian countries.
Righto. And John, what are you keeping an eye on?
There are a number of things, as you pointed out earlier. The deadline for U.S. companies to stop doing business with the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corporation, which is one of the big quasi-government organizations running Xinjiang province, which is associated with alleged human rights abuses. That deadline is Monday. And so what goes on from there? What the Trump administration is saying it will do more against China. What will that be? We hear stories about this list of 89 companies, Chinese companies who have association with Chinese military that Trump wants to ban U.S. companies from doing business with. That list has not come out. Will it come out? And if so, when? We will have the 5-year review of the Australia-China Free Trade Agreement, which may produce changes, but likely won't. It will likely just maintain the status quo given the ongoing dispute between Australia and China. And finally, in China itself, we have a Purchasing Managers Index, which will show us what the economy was doing in November, middle month of the final quarter. Expected to begin doing fairly well, but what we'll look for is any sense of plateauing. Is the economy reaching its ability to grow, the limits to its ability to grow, and what does that mean for 2021?
Quite a few days for you then, John.
Oh, yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, well, with that, thank you both. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for having cooperative and radio-friendly editors on our desk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for listening to this week's US-China Trade War Update with me, Finbarr Bermingham. We're going to be back same place next week, but before then, something to look forward to. On next week's show, we're going to have some of the audio of an interview that we've done with a real political heavyweight in Chinese circles. Long Yong-tu was one of the architects of China's accession to the World Trade Organization. He's been around the block. He's seen a few new US trade administrators come and go, so it's going to be great to get his thoughts, and we'll bring them to you this time next week. Until then, catch up with us on Twitter at SCMP Economy. I am at F Birmingham. Until then, there's plenty to keep up with on our website 24/7 at scmp.com. Don't forget, wash your hands, wear your mask, keep your distance, stay safe.
Starting on December the 1st, the South China Morning Post presents the second annual China Conference. This 2-day online event will be live streamed, bringing together business leaders, government officials, academics, and global thought leaders to discuss the unraveling US-China relationship and how it might be repaired. You'll hear expert analysis on trade, immigration, technology, and the impact of the US and China on global governance. To register, search for SCMP China Conference 2020 or visit the URL chinaconference.us. Free passes are available for a limited time. Use the promo code PODCASTVIP. The second annual China Conference, presented by the South China Morning Post.